Welcome to Almost Here, Round the Corner Future Technology podcasts with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies poised to transform our lives for better or worse are the focus of this podcast. Almost here means these technologies are now here and starting to be used, or just around the corner, from Bitcoin to artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech Podcast. My guest today is Di Giammarino. He's with JWG Group. We're going to be talking about the AI work that they're doing there. So, PJ, thank you for coming.
Hey, thanks for having me, Richard. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, tell me what in the world of AI, spoken to many companies, what's your stake in it? What are you guys working on at JWG?
JWG is really into RegTech, and we're one of the pioneers into this space, starting in the late noughties. I guess the analogy we like to use is that we're helping to define and climb the RegTech mountain for financial services, and that's all about getting banking from an analog era to a digital era in order to be able to see big increases in efficiency, not only for identifying what regulatory obligations are, but then how do you actually apply them to controls and make the system safer.
All right, so for people that don't understand, what is RegTech or RegTech for the uninitiated?
It's all about applying new technology like AI to businesses and business functions that need to make better use of the information, massive sets of information that are out there, and gain dramatic increases in effectiveness and efficiency. And really doing that with a purpose. I think the big thing about RegTech is it's very anchored in a whole bunch of things that regulators globally want the financial services system to do. There's many ways people do that today, but a lot of them are fairly antiquated. And what RegTech does is helps everybody leapfrog that and get them to an era where they're able to use standardized technology and information standards to be able to process and exchange information across the whole financial sector.
It almost seems like, I hope this is not insensitive, but it almost seems like an oxymoron, because it seems like regulators and regulation is designed to slow down tech and harness it under its will, not have its own technology, but it also does sound like it needs its own technology. So what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, there are definitely competing forces at play in this arena. One of them is obviously the regulator wanting to make sure everything is done by the book in a certain way, but then there's also another driving force is to make sure that the market itself is starting to understand and behave in different ways. And not all regulators are alike, right? So there's many different mandates. One here in the UK where I live is very focused on a competition mandate. So it wants to make sure that the market for financial services technology is also competitive, and wants to help make sure that the new entrants are also getting a seat at the table. But I think the bottom line is that a lot of what banking has become very, very technical. And so the regulators themselves have had to become very, very technical and get into the really nitty gritty of how we go about doing the business. Whether you talk about it as microstructural trading or high frequency trading or algorithmic trading or computer based trading, there's all kinds of rules out there globally that the regulators have put in force. And of course, the challenge with this is there's no one central regulator. There's lots of different bits of paper one has to go get. So the area we focused on most is how do you get 80,000 documents that have been published since 2009. If you printed them out, they'd be 3 Eiffel Towers tall, and you help clarify those obligations into a framework that allows a holistic view of what does it mean to me. And so if I'm in charge of trading, I can use data science to help me bring me my obligations, as opposed to having to pay people lots of time, give people lots of time and pay them lots of money to go crawl through it all manually and effectively cut and paste. And so this is where the leapfrogging comes in. If you can enrich that content set via data science and natural language processing, you're then able to think about how you deliver that in much better, faster, and cheaper ways.
So what are some examples of the work that you put out there, and any specific use cases on how it's affected what's going on?
Yeah, I guess I should start with what is a JWG. It all started for us 12 years ago. I was between jobs. I was COO for technology at a major UK clearing bank. I was on my way to a US clearing bank. We work in operations. And ultimately, I was on garden leave, and I found out about this new regulation coming in. And so it was 2005, and I went and sat and listened to a bunch of trade associations talk about how everything needed to change. And I said, well hold on a minute. You're talking about things happening 9 months from now. They said, yeah, that's what the regulators want. I said, well, it's not going to happen 9 months from now because nobody knows about it and it's not in the budgets. And they said, oh, well, you have to think about then how is this big change program going to come in? And that was our first start for this the market infrastructure initiative back in 2006 that then led into 2007. We started talking to all of the really politicians and people that held the pen that eventually became the technical standards for the regulators, and we worked through a way to help everyone regain control over what these regulatory changes actually meant. And we're not consultants. We don't offer legal opinion, but we do help pull the collaborative groups together to look at regulations early, even while their ink isn't yet dry, and help figure out what are the ways that you can approach these regulations in standardized ways. So we've held over 400 working groups since 2006, focused on a whole variety of different regulatory topics. There's no want of regulations post-crisis. The G20 and agreed a plan in Pittsburgh that had 93 action points, and so our reaction was, oh my gosh, if you look at all of the paper that'll be generated by even one of those action points within one of the countries, and then you start trying to work out how does it all fit with the common framework, we're gonna die a death of cutting and pasting if we can't work out a better way to glue this all together. So we continue to run our working groups and crowdsourcing all the intelligence, but what we've been focused on for the last 4 years is really coming into its own now. Is how do we get the intelligence from a group modeled and applied to regulation as it comes out, so that you can then solve regulatory management problems, right? And I think what we've developed through our RegDelta system is effectively a cloud-hosted SaaS application where we can load any regulatory content on it and give people back that control that they have by having everything in one place and not have this postal system of emailing documents from point A to B and C and losing information along the way. So our analysts have been busy combing all of the regulatory sites to be able to understand the totality of it, and then RegDelta delivers a solution for our clients.
Well, I would think you would need a additional position within regulatory bodies that reviews existing regulation and then compares it when new regulation is proposed, because it could be covered by existing stuff. I mean, if you know what's out there, also you'd increase compliance, you'd reduce duplication. I would think this would give regulators a much better ability to figure out if what they've done is effective and what to, how to address new problems as well.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things we're focused on as an industry. And I have the privilege of chairing the RegTech Council, which brings together regulators and regulated, so both the tech suppliers and the firms themselves. And one of the initiatives that we've kicked off there is effectively a semantically focused exercise, which we're calling the new initiatives track, that's looking to figure out how do you get from a regulator's website straight through into the organization and get to the point of control. And we have a team now taking one particular regulation, looking at how it's actually written and the glossary that's on the regulator's website, and then helping to figure out how you make the link and transform that obligation that's in a bit of text on a website into an HTML message that then gets routed to the right individuals. And this is the work, obviously, that's done manually today. Lots of consultants and lawyers and conferences and all those kind of things. But we just can't keep doing it that way. So that, you're right. There's a need for the regulator to speak a language that's actually routable and actionable in the across the tens of thousands of financial institutions that have to comply.
Yeah, and if regulators are going to work on high-tech stuff, they need to have technology at their disposal, because otherwise they're at a disadvantage. And, I'd bet if a regulator feels that they're working as a Luddite, but yet they have to regulate, super high-level technology, there's probably resentment and just an inability to do it the right way, because they don't have tools themselves.
Yeah, I guess, increasingly regulators are starting to get tooled up. There's a whole conversation about subtech or supervisor technology. This is really just the other side of the coin from what any kind of individual firm has to do. But the answer to the crisis was transparency. Everything had to be on a report. Not like it didn't before, but we have lots more reports now. Everything from your trading activity in products that weren't ever on exchanges and were never really able to share that information, through to how your customer, do your money laundering checks, through to how you manage your capital and your exposures. So there's lots of different ways on the RegTech mountain that regulators think about defining what information you have to share, and that's exactly where it gets interesting, because then at that point you do have accountability from the regulator to say, you know what, I want to see information this way, for this purpose. And the part of the more holistic conversation across regulators is, what we need to do is find a way to glue those different ways together. And if you're able to help define a language that we can use to do that and the standards by which we can transform it, then we can all be a lot more compliant with at a much lower cost footprint than we currently are today.
And how are regulators reacting to the systems you're bringing in to allow them to review documents and consolidate and semantically search? Do they like it? Are they excited? I mean, what's the outlook?
Yeah, I think that it's a voyage of discovery. Not all regulators move at the same pace. I mean, and some take different interests, right? But I think what we've seen is a new regulatory community being born over the last couple of years. I mean, it used to be, the UK was out in front and there wasn't much else. Now, the CFTC has a whole labs effort in the U.S. There's all kinds of things going on in the Middle East. Abu Dhabi has a similar type of effort. You have things going on in Hong Kong and in Australia, Japan. So there's regulators have all, I think, awoken to the need to do something, and they've been experimenting. The great news is now they're starting to communicate and join up. I mean, there's literally one podcast I can direct you to if you want that it has a bit of role play with the U.S. regulator phoning up the UK regulator and talking RegTech, which to me is great. All of a sudden you have cross pollination and fertilization of ideas.
Yeah, how does that work? I'm sure most people don't. I don't know. They probably don't even think about it. But what's it like to be inside the world of regulators? Do they communicate overseas, between countries, between regions, or is this just starting to happen now?
Good question. I mean, they've always had to in the context of supervising a firm, right? So you have a big global systemically important firm. They have their own college, they call it. So they bring in all the supervisors to talk about every individual jurisdiction's view of how that the company or the firm is performing, and the headquarters will usually dictate where that's run from. And I guess the big shift we've seen in the past 2 to 3 years of the RegTech is that notion, that same organizing principle doesn't really hold when you're talking about what's the role of new technology, right? Because it's not firm by firm. It's really more theme by theme. So I think what we're seeing is that where regulators have an appetite to automate their rule book, let's say, or think about how they enrich and tag the rule books in a way that is more accessible and how they do it in a standardized manner. There'll almost be a little self-forming community of interest around that. That may differ completely from the group of regulators that wants to look at how do we think about using the blockchain to manage money laundering. They have a whole separate tech sprint, is what they tend to call it here in the UK, or it's called sandboxes, or various other terms for it throughout the regulatory jargon. But they have essentially formal ways of engaging with the industry to pilot concepts and learn from what works and what doesn't.
All right. So what are some of the use cases again that you're working on or are coming, in the next 6 months or a year that you're excited about? What kind of impact do you see JWG having?
In terms of there's two main motivators for RegTech, and I think at the end of the day it comes down to fear or greed. So from a fear point of view, there's we've reached that tipping point where the volume of regulation, the complexity of it, has just gotten too much for a lot of people, and they're afraid that they're missing things, and they need a better structured way. So we're working with those kind of firms to help them figure out a way that we can offer them essentially a triage function directly on top of the documents, right? So as a document comes out, instead of introducing a bunch of clunky workflow that helps people check it, get that document in a one central place, and then manage the workflow from that document, so all the knowledge comes together in one place, right? And then be able to ensure controls are put around the actual development of the policies that are required to comply. And that's incredibly exciting, because all of a sudden you then have people able to work off of one common version of the truth. The other end of the spectrum, in terms of the greed that we see in the industry, is these costs are just absolutely enormous, and a lot of it gets down to the manual effort involved in mapping, right? Trying to understand what are the regulators talking about, and how do I control what I do, and doing the join between those two things. And what we've been proving this year is we can do the semantic modeling. We can use the natural language processor of AI to be able to take the words that are in these documents, the concepts and the phrases, and make sure that we interpret the context of what is being said. So, for example, if a document's published in Singapore, and it's a technology, it talks about a number of terms like data theft and endpoint devices and encryption policies and the like. Instead of having someone try to go read that, find out, figure out what it means, we can route that particular paragraph or whole document to the policy owner for data loss control. Right, and so it's making the match, using the AI to say this is something you want to take a look at. And in that case, it's not taking the people out of the picture. It's very much keeping them front and center of the picture, but it's cutting the human workload by 85% in some cases. Right, it's getting them to the case where they all say, "Yep, that is something I have to deal with." Or if it's false positive, "Yep, no, train the model to be able to get me better stuff." And I think it's those kinds of things that I get the most energy from, because in either case, the triage and the horizon scanning or mapping to controls, we're taking out a tremendous amount of pain, tremendous amount of very difficult work that takes an awful lot of energy, and there isn't the people doing it often don't get thanked enough for it. So this is the kind of thing that really helps make a difference at the end of the day.
So any surprises that you've gotten from running your AI tools and from doing this work? Anything that you didn't realize would happen that did?
I say I've been surprised at how much we've been able to do just with English. Obviously regulators write in lots of different languages, but one of the great things about financial services, it does have a common base in English. And we've been able to of course, house local language content, but use English metadata to glue things together. And I think that we're just at that point now, 5 years into this, where we're starting to get, okay, well, but if you've got the word mortgage in English, can you link that to the Dutch word and the French word, the Spanish word for mortgage, so I can find all the relevant content? Which is possible. It's just I've always thought that would have been something we needed to sort up front. And I think the big lesson learned for me is, hey, the English is probably good enough as to be able to establish the rule framework, and then it's fine tuning thereafter. And ultimately, I think it's, as ever with these programs, it's all about the people, and it's all about how do you get this AI-assisted natural language processing to deliver the intelligence to the humans that can then feel comfortable at how they're actually routing it around and interpreting what it means. And that's the exciting bit. When they actually get the bit between their teeth and start running at that, then all kinds of good things start happening.
All right, so what's your crystal ball say, over the next year or couple of years? How do you see that JWG is going to impact the regulatory space? And do you think it's going to just fundamentally change, or it'll just get a bit better and more efficient? What do you see happening?
That's a good question. I always said if I had a crystal ball, I'd be playing the markets, not doing regulation. But I think ultimately we're at that tipping point now where we've talked and proven lots of these concepts out. We're starting to see huge demand for a lot of this, shall I say, specialized mapping to controls, and I think that's an area really starts taking off. And as you start finding ways to take public source content and tailor it to a private source, you start introducing the opportunity to have new data sets. So that's where you have true AI and machine learning type approaches can then start entering and help out, right? So it's no longer just about, does that one particular document relate to this control, but what's the context of that control being talked about, and are there other things going on in the market or with my customers or in the legal system that I need to know about? So, obviously, if there's a big court case in Singapore that's prompting the discussion about data loss controls, maybe you need to trigger that. And, hey, maybe this could even have a market impact, and we need to be thinking about what our position is vis-a-vis some of the different companies that are out there. So I think that's what we're playing for. It's that more holistic, more integrated, and frankly, ever more intelligent application of technology to some pretty complicated business problems.
Well, very good. So, PJ, what's the best way for listeners to reach out and find out more and possibly see some of your work in action?
Well, the website is www.jwg-it.eu. There's all kinds of information out there. We publish around about 100 pieces a year on our blog, and all kinds of webinars that we also run in this space on specific topics. Pick the ones that are interested in you, and we always have our workshops. So if people want to come along to a joint working group, they're more than welcome. Just need to get in touch and let us know. And of course, if you want the RegDelta system, you can find that on it's an alias through the same site, but it's regdelta.com. And more than happy to set up a demo for anybody who wants to see it.
All right, very good. Well, PJ, thanks for coming. I appreciate you being on the podcast.
Richard, thank you. Been a very interesting discussion.
You have been listening to Almost Here, Around the Corner Future Technology podcast with Richard Jacobs. Subscribe to this podcast, post a review to discover more future technologies that are poised to transform our lives for better or worse, such as Bitcoin, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.